The Iowa legislature has gavelled in with another term of Republican trifecta control. Democrats made gains in the Iowa House but lost seats in the Iowa Senate in 2018. So what do they plan to accomplish in the 2019 session? We sit down with Senator Janet Petersen and Representative Todd Prichard on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond, now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, January 18 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
2019 marks a new year at the Iowa legislature, but Iowans may be feeling a bit of deja vu as Republicans now enter year 3 of full trifecta control of the governorship, the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. So just what exactly do Democratic leaders plan to accomplish in the face of all these Republicans? We'll ask our guests at the Iowa Press table today, where we're joined by House Minority Leader, Representative Todd Prichard of Charles City, and Senator Janet Petersen of Des Moines, the Senate Minority Leader. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Also joining the conversation are Iowa political reporters James Lynch of the Gazette and Kay Henderson, news director at Radio Iowa.
Senator Petersen, the governor gave 2 major speeches this week. On Tuesday, the condition of the state, and on this Friday, the inaugural address for a 4-year term. Did you hear something in that spoke to you as a Democrat? She talked about bipartisanship in both addresses.
She did talk a lot about bipartisanship, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work on several issues together in her first year as the elected governor of the state of Iowa.
She mentioned mental health. That's something that was started. Has she provided enough money for that?
You know, the fact that she mentioned it in her speech is great. We would like to see more funding going toward mental health, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I know parents all over the state are calling for a better children's mental health system, and we need to get to work.
Representative Prichard, the governor, said when she steps back from her vantage point of visiting all 99 counties, she sees Iowa as one big small town. Is that the way you view the state?
Well, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I think, you know, a state of about 3 million people, we're not the most populated state. There's a lot of connections. I mean, we have connections all over the state. I think there's a lot that binds us together as a state. And I think I can agree with the governor on that point, you know, that we are a small state in many ways.
One of the big ideas that the governor talked about in her condition of the state speech was restoring felons' voting rights, and it's something that she mentioned after the election. And but it looks like she's going to get some pushback in the legislature and maybe from her own party. Is that an issue, Senator Petersen, that Democrats are willing to help the governor get that issue on the ballot so voters could approve a constitutional amendment?
Yeah, I think Democrats are looking at ways we can expand voter rights, including voter rights for felons, also automatic voter registration when kids go and get their first driver's license. So she should see a lot of support from Democrats on that issue. I would love to see us not wait, but she has the ability to issue an executive order, and I hope she'd use her authority to do so.
Representative Prichard, in the House, will the Democrats be working to get that on the ballot? And is that the appropriate way to go about this, to make it a constitutional amendment, or is this something that can be handled legislatively?
Well, I think in talking to my members of my caucus in the House, I mean, that's something that we can definitely get behind. I mean, whenever you talk about expanding voter rights, improving access to the ballot box, that's something that Democrats can easily get behind. So I was pleased to hear her comments in the State of the State address. There are things that she can do sooner as opposed to later. If she's going to propose a constitutional amendment, that's about a 4-year process. That's a long time for people who should have their voting rights restored. So there are things that we feel that she can do now through the executive power to restore voting rights for people that are deserving.
Is one of the reasons that the governor is getting pushback from her own party is because demographically a lot of those felons would vote like a Democrat. They're lower income, a lot of minorities. I mean, isn't this really a partisan issue? They don't want to add Democrats to the electorate?
I'm not going to speak for the Republicans on their on their view of that issue, but I would hope it's not a partisan issue. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about voting rights. And voting rights, if there's one thing that should be above politics, it's voting rights. And I would hope that this is not a partisan issue.
Senator, what do you think? Partisan issue?
Well, I would agree with Representative Prichard. It shouldn't be a partisan issue, and so I hope we can move forward on it.
Well, one of the reasons what's driving this is the need for workers in Iowa. Do you think, Senator, that the need Iowa has for more workers is one thing that's driving this issue that could help get it approved?
Well, we've seen need for workers all across the state, in small towns and in the urban areas, and so I think you'll see focus on several policy issues helping to build the workforce, some good, some not so good.
Both of you have mentioned the governor could issue an executive order to restore felon voting rights. And I'm wondering, if she did that, would that take the pressure off the legislature and sort of torpedo her own initiative? Senator Petersen, do you see that as a problem?
I don't see that as a problem. I think she's made her voice heard on this issue, and I'm hoping that the legislature will take action.
I would add, both things are the right thing to do. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive remedies to deal with this voter issue. So I'd like to see her do both. I mean, there's a near-term and a long-term solution here.
In covering the legislature over the past several years, there have been some knockdown, drag-out fights over funding for K-12 schools. The governor has recommended a 2.3% increase in general state aid for schools. Representative Prichard, it amounts to about $89 million. That's far more than the Republican-led legislature has approved in the past few cycles. Is that appropriate?
Well, we're pleased that that's where the governor's starting at. I think if I had to bet, I think she's probably going to come in high to where her colleagues in the Senate and the House will be at. We're advocating for at least 3%. Over the last few years, particularly in rural districts, my district in Charles City has seen a lot of cuts. It's because they're not getting the support and the funding that they need from the state. And we've gone on what's called budget guarantees, where we basically have shifted the tax burden and the funding burden for local districts to local property taxpayers and local taxpayers. The state has to do its part, and so we're advocating for at least 3% to get the local school districts where they should be in this current year.
Senator Petersen, you represent one of the biggest school district in Iowa. It also has that same problem, correct?
Yes, and you'll see that they're making some changes to scheduling and potential for lost teachers. There's a big hole that Iowa schools are needing to be dug out of, and so we were hoping that the governor would have a larger amount in for schools.
She did recommend $11 million to cover transportation costs, which primarily, Representative Prichard, helps those sprawling rural districts and kids who are riding the bus for 90 minutes. Can you plug $11 million and fix the problem?
I mean, certainly we're welcome for any help that we can get, particularly where districts like mine and a lot of the districts around my district have these higher busing costs. I mean, that's going to address the problem. Is it going to be enough? Probably not. I mean, this is a much bigger problem than $11 million. One other thing with the governor's numbers is, she claims she said 2.3 or 2.8%, depending on how you look at it. I mean, very careful as to how these dollars are allocated and what they can be used for, and that makes a big difference, particularly for rural districts, as to how the money is allocated and what it can be used for.
When we talk about the K-12 funding, when we talk about felon voting rights, mental health, Are we in a situation where this year the governor and the Republican governor and Democrats are more closely aligned than perhaps the governor and her own party in the legislature? Senator Petersen, do you see opportunities to work together?
I do. You know, there were a lot of things in the governor's speech that Democrats can get behind. Affordable housing was another issue that she brought up in her speech, and that's something that we saw on the campaign trail that's desperately needed out there. So I'm hoping we'll be able to find areas to work together on.
Is the governor going to get some help from House Democrats in sort of carrying her agenda forward, putting pressure on your Republican colleagues?
It's definitely possible. The Democrats in the House, we really have two top priorities, and they're education and their health care. Last year, in the governor's State of the State address, she mentioned that the Medicaid privatization system was not going as well as people had hoped, and we would agree. And we would like to see some dramatic changes in the Medicaid privatization system. We'd like to see accountability restored. We'd like to see services restored. In education, like we talked about with the school funding, I mean, there are possibly ways here that we can find ways to work together and support her.
The governor barely mentioned Medicaid in her condition of the state speech. Were you surprised by that and disappointed?
I was listening closely to what she had to say, and I was listening specifically for specific proposals that would fix what I see when I talk to voters and talk to people who are using the Medicaid system as to what their problems are. I was disappointed I didn't hear specific things to address those concerns, and to me it really gets to the accountability of the services that the Medicaid system is providing, that the MCOs are providing.
But Senator Petersen, Fred Hubble essentially made Medicaid privatization sort of a referendum, and he lost. Why would she make changes after she won?
Well, I would say she won. She didn't win by a lot. And I do believe Iowans in communities across our state are still seeing the problems with Medicaid, with their providers not getting paid on time or in full. And if providers shut their door to Medicaid patients, they may shut their door to all Iowans for health care. So access to health care will continue to be an issue for Iowans. And we still are hearing about several people being denied services. And I think Iowans still care about that.
And I want to chime in. I mean, this Medicaid system is not working. It's not working for my community. I hear stories weekly, if not sometimes daily, about people who are denied services that need critical services. I hear from providers, chiropractors, dentists, all sorts of therapists, people like that who are providing services and not getting reimbursed. It's having a horrible effect, particularly in rural Iowa, where they can't spread those type of costs because they're losing money on some aspect of their business, and they don't have a big enough customer base to spread those costs like you do in urban areas. So this is not working.
Well, it's hurting urban areas as well.
There is a House race that is in dispute currently. It's up in the Decorah area, House District 55. The race was decided by a margin of 9 votes. Representative Michael Bergen, a Republican from Dorchester, was certified as the winner. Kayla Cater, who's the Democrat challenger from Decorah, has asked legislators to force the counting of 29 ballots. The two of us covered a very long committee meeting where essentially the same arguments that were made in court in December were argued. I mean, isn't this headed to the Iowa Supreme Court, Representative Prichard?
I don't know. It could be. The committee's got work to do. The committee, as you mentioned this week, listened to the arguments of the attorneys. The court ruled in Polk County in December last month that the proper venue was to have this in front of the legislature for the contest to at least kind of start there. And so the committee's got some more work to do. I anticipate that they'll hear from witnesses next week. They'll hear from perhaps the Secretary of State, some county auditors around the state.
Mr. Prichard, don't you think the Democrat really got the most votes? You guys do a much better job than Republicans do on absentee ballots.
Right.
I mean, even they acknowledge that. So you're sitting there with 20-some absentees uncounted.
Right.
He's won by, what did you say, 9 votes?
Right.
The Democratic votes are all sitting there.
Possibly. We simply don't know. And I think what really is at stake here is a higher principle of voter and election integrity. I mean, the people of House District 55, which is very close to my district, deserve to know what the true outcome is of this election. And that's why, you know, we have been adamant that we need to have a transparent and fair process in front of the legislature for this contest.
Senator, regardless of who gets seated in that race, doesn't the legislature have to come up with some cleanup language that to sort of define some of the terms for absentee ballots? It could be postmarked, but is the barcode good enough for a postmark? It's very confusing. Different auditors are doing it differently. Isn't some cleanup language needed?
Well, my concern is that the cleanup language doesn't make it harder for people to have their votes counted. So that's my biggest concern.
I would say one thing too on this is that when you look at the code that is kind of at issue here was passed in 2016. It's clear. If it's got a postmark or what's intelligent barcode, something that says when that ballot was mailed and put in the postal system, determines when if it should count. And all of these 29 disputed ballots were mailed by the information put on the envelope. So I don't think it would be nice maybe to clarify, but I think the law is pretty clear.
Another flashpoint issue that's emerging in the legislature where there isn't a lot of kumbaya singing is the Judicial Nominating Commission, the commission that nominates justices to the Supreme Court. A lot of Republican conservatives are upset with the way that the Iowa Supreme Court has been ruling on issues like abortion, gay marriage. Senator Petersen, you think the Republicans will strip the Bar Association of their votes or weaken the power of the Bar Association on this commission in an effort to get more conservative justices? It
certainly looks like they're headed that direction, wanting to fix something that's not broken.
And Representative, what do you think? What's the prospects for that in the House?
I think you say that some may be displeased with recent decisions and they're conservative. Well, there's probably some that are on the other side of the political spectrum that are displeased with other decisions. Politicizing our judiciary process and the way that we appoint justices to the Supreme Court is not the answer. We have a model for the nation. It's a merit-based system. There's no reason to change it.
You're a lawyer. Is the Bar Association in Iowa backing too many liberals for the court?
I don't think so. I think the attorneys that I know that have been a part of this process, whether it's selecting magistrates, district court judges, or Supreme Court justices, they look for competent jurists, people that understand the law, they understand the court system. I don't see a political tinge.
Senator Petersen, a big national story and Iowa story this week was when House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy kicked Iowa Congressman Steve King off of his House committee assignments because of things that King said to the New York Times. You, meanwhile, put Nate Bolton, a state senator who ran for governor and dropped that campaign when women came forward with allegations of sexual misconduct. Why did you do that? If Kevin McCarthy can kick Steve King off of House committees, why is Nate Bolton back on Senate committees?
Well, the Senate Ethics Committee, their ruling allows him to continue to fulfill his term. And so my expectation for Senator Bolton is that he'll uphold the duties of the job. And I believe I assigned him to appropriate committees.
But you have the authority to not assign him to any. Why didn't you do that?
You know, it's a tough decision of trying to use my power without abusing my power.
Senator, you're a Polk County Democrat. Do you expect him to be primaried and he's from Polk County, do you expect him to be primaried if he seeks another term?
I am hearing rumblings that he will. And I do want to make the point that we have continued to strive to make the Capitol a more welcome and safe place to work. And we have worked in a bipartisan manner on our policies. And in my opening day speech, I said I will continue to work on that. I do believe we need to make some changes to the Senate Code of Ethics and continue making sure that we have a better path to justice for people.
So what would those changes be?
We're looking at several areas. One is who can file a complaint, the statute of limitations. There's some areas of does the Code of Ethics apply when they are not at the State House, when they are at the State House prior to elections. So a lot of different areas I think we need to take a closer look at.
Representative Prichard, you're an attorney. I mean, how do you, as the House Ethics Committee, let's say, govern the behavior of something someone does before they're even elected to office, which was the case in Senator Bolton's instance.
In the House, what we've done, my office and Speaker Ottmeyer's office has worked together over the last few weeks after the election and come up to kind of retool the House rules and guidelines for harassment and things like that. We've implemented training. We've updated the policy manual. What my goal is, and I think Speaker Ottmeyer's goal is to set the example with our members and our employees of the legislature and the House as to what is acceptable behavior and have a culture that is safe and appropriate for people that serve and work there.
Representative Prichard, you mentioned earlier that Democratic priorities are health care and education. I wonder, are there some Democratic priorities that the governor hasn't addressed that you're going to have to, I guess, maybe work harder to get on the agenda?
Sure. We've got concerns about the tax policy. In 2018, last legislative session, we passed one of the, what the governor will call one of the largest income tax breaks in the state's history. We want to see how that unfolds. We had a budget update from David Roederer this week and saw that there was really kind of a burden shift away from income tax and more onto sales tax. And that's kind of a regressive shift, and that gives concern to me and a lot of my colleagues. And so we want to make sure that the tax system is fair, that people are paying what is fair and having an appropriate burden. So that's something that is always on the mind of Democrats, that we have a fair system in regards to taxation.
Representative, it's never an official Iowa Press show unless we talk politics.
Sure.
So I'm going to turn to politics right now. You're a rural Democrat, yet your party lost in rural Iowa in this last election. Why?
There's probably a lot of reasons why. I think, I can talk about my experience, and what I've tried to do as a rural Democrat is really be present and listen and engage my constituents and voters where they are, and really try to understand what's on their mind. And what I come back to is it's really kind of the kitchen table pocketbook issues. I grew up in Davenport, Iowa. I grew up in an urban part of the state, and now I live in Charles City, and the two communities are very similar. Both suffered from the ag decline in manufacturing with White Farm in Charles City. And so the issues are really very similar. It's about bringing services to the community, having economic opportunities, good jobs in the community, letting families being able to pay their bills. So I mean, it's coming down to listening.
Senator, you're an urban Democrat. What do you say to Democratic legislative candidates about how they can do better in rural Iowa? You've got to, if you're ever going to be majority leader, you got to do better in rural Iowa.
They need to do what Amanda Reagan does, and that is she hits every single door when she runs in her district, and she wins. And I think the same is true for Senator Kinney.
You need more rural Iowa candidates? Fred Hubbell was a Des Moines liberal. He'd never run for office before. I mean,
the governor won 88 of Iowa's 99 counties.
Shouldn't you be nominating more rural Democrats for statewide office?
Well, I would love to see more rural Iowa Democrats run. I think we could use a lot more in the State House.
Senator Petersen, you have sort of the reverse problem or situation, depending on your viewpoint, in Polk County and other urban areas of the state where Democrats picked up seats and I think can control most of those seats. Do you worry that further widens the rural-urban divide, and especially when you think about issues that apply to Polk County or other urban counties, if you have no Republican support to stop the dissolution of the Des Moines Water Works, for example? How do you combat that? I mean, how do you make yourself heard in a Republican-controlled administration and legislature?
Well, I think one thing that's kind of interesting is that the 3 out of the 4 leaders in the Republican Party are, from the urban areas. So I just think that we need to do more to work together on issues such as water quality. I mean, this is an issue that impacts us no matter where you live. Every Iowan wants safe drinking water.
But that was an issue that the governor really didn't talk about at all in her address, and I didn't really hear Republican leaders making it a priority. They've done that.
Yeah, you know, we still have a long way to go to improve our water. There's been a lot of people asking us about the 3/8 cent sales tax, if that would be passed this year. And unless the governor is willing to exert some leadership on water quality, I don't see us making big strides in that area this year.
Representative Prichard, what's your answer? I mean, how are you going to sell a tax increase in rural Iowa?
Well, with the water quality issue, and what I want to chime in on is that the bill that was passed last year, the governor kind of championed it as, you know, the big answer to the water quality problem. It isn't. It was a start. If you look at the numbers from Iowa State University, Iowa has about a $4 billion water quality issue, and that gets to things like public, you know, like retention ponds and some of the infrastructure that we need to put in our watersheds. I think Iowans are willing in rural Iowa to be partners in the solution. And you know, I don't think that this legislature is going to consider like a 3/8 cents outright increase, but it could be something that is discussed as part of a broader package and broader tax reform. We'd be open to that discussion, but I think the bottom line for me is that we've got to do more for water quality. We can't look at 2018 and say we solved the issue then.
The bottom line for me is we're out of time. Thank you both for being with us. We hope to have you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back with another edition of Iowa Press next week when we focus on a potentially historic opening for legalized sports gambling in Iowa. We'll sit down with Representative Bobby Kaufman, Wes Araki of the Iowa Gaming Association, and gambling law expert Keith Miller from Drake University. That's Iowa Press next week at our regular times. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.